Beautiful thing about you might be thinking, oh, this is a lot of work. This is kind of like I'm in the trenches here with all this relationship work. But the beautiful thing is that when you're in partnership, what I just said starts to happen is you start to learn from your partner becomes your ability to heal, because they both show you your stories and your triggers. And then there are things in them that you need for yourself, right? That they can teach you.
Hey everyone, welcome to season 2. This is the official first episode. I wanted to share just a little bit about what's going on with Podcast Farm and with the podcast, and just give a shout out to all of you wonderful listeners who have been following the journey and sharing with me, which episodes stand out for you and what you'd like to hear more of. It's been just really inspiring to hear how these conversations have affected you all, and I'm just infinitely grateful for each one of you listening. It's truly a dream to get to put together this show for you all and to interview extraordinary folks and to explore this wonderful world of podcasting and sharing our voice. So on this season, I have some really exciting shows planned, some really amazing guests, awesome topics, and I cannot wait to bring them all to you. Today's episode is with Damodar Cordua. He and his wife live in Tucson, and they have a incredible boutique, health and wellness boutique. They have a yoga studio right next door. They make their own medicine. They're an incredible example of a couple, an entrepreneurial couple, doing the thing, making it work, getting through the challenges of relationship, practicing spirituality and conscious business. And I'm really excited to bring this conversation with Damodar to you all. So stick around. We get into some really good relationship practical tips for how to improve your relationship, your communication. We talk about what it takes to run a business. We get into a little bit of spiritual topics. There's something for everyone in this episode, and I hope you enjoy. And thanks again for tuning in. Hello, Damodar Prabhu. Thank you so much for being here. This is your wonderful space. I am here at Bava Wellness in Tucson, Arizona. And, I'm just passing through, got some tattoos while I was here, and I happened to find you on Instagram or something, and I just hit you up and was like, hey, I'm coming through. I would love to sit down, interview you. You're a relationship coach, life coach. You and your partner, Radha, moved here recently and have this beautiful yoga studio and a health and wellness shop that we'll show you guys some here shortly. But yeah, how are you doing today? Thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me here, Kaylee. I want to thank you for literally walking right into my life yesterday, coming on up to the space, and it just made me feel kind of connected, and I felt that your presence was something that was going to be a blessing to my life. So thank you for all the work that you do.
It's my pleasure, and I love to meet family that I've never met before. It's a good feeling when you have that connection. And yeah, so maybe you could share with the audience a little bit, because I know that this space here is a little bit newer, and you've had a really interesting journey, with Bava Wellness and stuff. But maybe even before that, where did you grow up, first of all, and a little bit about your backstory?
Cool. Yeah, I'm from Philly. I'm from the East Coast. That's where I grew up, and I moved around a little bit. I lived in other cities, Chicago and New York. And to make a long story short and succinct, I was getting into the healing world actually through tattooing, which we talked about earlier, and I got into healing and massage and yoga. Started dating my now wife, and we were in Philadelphia at the time. And then we met this person. Some of you might know him from a previous podcast of yours. And his name is Raghunath. And he's a yoga teacher, and he teaches yoga asana, but he teaches bhakti, or the yoga of love, yoga of devotion. And so he sort of like entered into our life, and I was already into yoga and healing, but the whole paradigm sort of shifted. And we went to India with him, did a pilgrimage. And when we got back from that pilgrimage, well, while we were there, we were asking the divine, the universe, what am I supposed to be doing? What are we supposed to be doing? Give us direction. We want to offer our service up to you, our life up to you. And we came back to Philly from this pilgrimage, and we just knew we were supposed to open a space. I mean, at least I felt like I knew. I don't know. Maybe that sounds crazy. I knew I had to open a space between this street and this street. And we just had never owned a business. And we just looked for real estate, signed a lease, and figured it out. And then it became kind of like the progenitor, or the nexus, the original of this space here that we had in Philly, which is a combination of yoga, a wellness boutique with herbal items and herbal remedies and products that my wife makes and sells, and then services such as life and relationship coaching, massage, energy work. And then, of course, underneath that, a sort of spiritual awareness, a spiritual ideal, or maybe a spiritual purpose. So that was really the thing that started us, that trip. It opened up our lives to healing in a deeper way. And then we moved here to Tucson. My wife one day said, I think I want to move back to the desert. She's from the desert. And I was like, oh, that's great. Maybe when we retire, maybe 10 years. And then she said, no, Damodar, like now. Like, I want to go now. So we decided to make the move, and we came here to Tucson about 2 years ago. And, we've noticed that we, as a business, try to offer healing, right, in many forms. But we noticed that all these various types of healing, not only are they complementary, but they kind of speak to like the deeper healing and connection that we're all searching for, or at least that's what I've noticed in my life. So we try to hold space for that in our own way, and that's kind of the skinny.
So it sounds like, so first you were in Philly and you had the yoga studio and the boutique there as well.
Yeah, exactly.
And then you relocated it here. And yeah, it sounds like in your quest to actually heal and actually be of deep service, you have like multiple layers. Like you have yoga and asana, and you have different meditation and spiritual practices that you can serve people with. And you have the herbal piece and sort of like the wellness side, of the physical body. Obviously yoga's connected to that, but it's like more of a medicinal thing. And then even on top of that, you have life coaching and relationship coaching, which is really one of the things that I noticed about your profile on Instagram, because we also follow some of the same teachers in the relationship field and all this. So I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about how you got into relationship coaching, life coaching, and whatnot.
Yeah, I'd love to. Thank you so much for that question. And, it's interesting because I alluded to a spiritual basis for our business, and then of course for our relationship, meaning my wife and I. But even though our spiritual life is such a fundamental way that we navigate this world, I noticed that there were some things, some tools, I was lacking in relational capability. And some of the ideas, say, in spiritual life weren't necessarily directly allowing me in a practical sense to move through some of these stuck places. So my wife and I, we run a business together. We, are always around one another. We have a great relationship. And even having all that, being able to be in business together and not murder each other or commit suicide, or have a great relationship. But I noticed that we kept on getting stuck. To this day, to be frank, there's still areas that we are really trying to work on. And I realized I just did not have the tools. And Kaylee and I were talking about this previous to the podcast, that so many of us, I almost liken it to like a quarterback, and this is going to sound weird. I'm not even into sports. But like a quarterback obviously has a skill or a talent, we'll say, to run, to throw a ball. But if the quarterback doesn't practice day after day, to get ready for that moment of high intensity conflict of a giant, literally a giant person running at the quarterback to tackle them, then the quarterback's going to freak out, right? Or run away. So the quarterback takes time to gain the tools and gain the wisdom of the nervous system and the body-mind connection to understand, okay, how can I be with this situation, not run away, not freak out, not freeze. Some of you may know these terms. So it's the same thing for us if it's work life or relationship life. How can we practice and build those tools with a coach, because a quarterback has a coach, with someone who can give us perspective and help us. And I think that everybody needs it. Just like I feel like everybody needs, I think everybody needs some spiritual awareness, or to at least explore that area of themselves, whatever that might be. I really believe that we all need relational tools. And one of the people that we've studied with has this grand vision, which I really believe that like the world needs it. Children need it at a young age, and teenagers, and people in relationship to their siblings, to their spouses, to their mothers and fathers. And I'll stop in 1 second, because if we see in our generation, brother, like maybe our parents, and we can see, oh man, if they only had a couple of these tools, like how things would have been so different. So I feel like it's almost our responsibility to learn them and to help share them,
You said so many wonderful things there, and it brought to mind Harville Hendrix, who wrote the book Getting the Love You Want, I believe.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And he talks about how relationships are the upstream source of society's issues, because if you think about what society is, it's a collection of people. The very first society is one person and another person. And so getting that right, and obviously the most common format that takes is like a partnership, right? Like a romantic partnership. So if we can get that right, so many of society's problems could be at least alleviated somewhat, right? I don't think that we'll ever get to a utopia, but as far as collaboration goes, communication, like war starts at home. War starts between two partners having a disagreement, and based on how we can repair, how we can, lean into the conflict in a healthy way, take responsibility, I think that shows up in society. And, during COVID, everyone was forced to be stuck in a box with their significant other. And I think everyone had some wake-up calls about where they were lacking, So I'm wondering, like, what are some, like maybe one skill or one tool that you feel would be really helpful for anyone listening for when they're in conflict with their partner, and it could be their friend, right? It could be their family member, but for this example with their partner, what's something that people can do to get better at relationship and at conflict?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I love what you shared. I think, one of the key aspects, and I mentioned this in my the previous kind of rant I had about relationships and relationship tools and coaching, is the ability to slow down, really slow down the nervous system. I mean, we're in a society that's so fast-paced, and I'm in the wellness industry, and I feel like stressed and fat. It's kind of sick, I would say, definitely sick. And it's the ability then for us to slow down and really hold space for how we're feeling, right? Because we've been taught to either run away from the feelings, to medicate the feelings in some way, to like cover them up, cope in that sense, or we're taught to be like overwhelmed by them, or we learn to be overwhelmed by them. And to your point, a lot of those mechanisms that we've learned come from relationship when we first started our journey in this lifetime with our primary caregiver. So anybody who says, Well, first you got to, someone said this in class the other day, like you have to learn to love yourself before you can love someone else, which is like a very common yoga or wisdom on maybe, say, Instagram you might read or something. But it's so untrue, because the process of learning to love ourselves is always in relationship. It's right away in relationship. Right away. It's in with our primary caregiver and how that bond is created. So going back to your question, if we can learn a few simple tools from the get-go and then practice them, and that's the hardest part. The hardest part is practicing. And I, honestly, I have a hard time practicing them. That's why I do it, because I have a really hard time practicing, is to really hold space for how I'm feeling, slow down, so that instead of simply being hijacked by a reaction to a conflict, or defaulting to that coping mechanism, or fleeing, or freezing, or fighting, that we can actually be with the emotions and start to unravel what they're telling us, and then create frank conversation with our partner that is not so supercharged. Because in slowing down, we can allow those emotions to settle a bit. We can allow our nervous system to repair. So that's one thing that I'd recommend. I mean,
Let's go into that.
So many things to recommend.
I think that's a brilliant one, and it's something that a relationship coach that I worked with me and a former partner on, and immensely transformative relationship, and getting coaching really, like you're talking about, with practice, with having someone to spar with, basically, and to practice slowing down. It's really important. But what does it mean to slow down? Like in the, like someone's having a fight. If you're a listener, you've had a fight with your significant other. What would it look like to slow down, really?
Yeah. It would look like, and there's a specific meditations for this that many teachers will give, but generally speaking, it looks like allowing the nervous system to not be completely hijacked, okay? What does that mean? Okay, so then the question is, how do you do that? And it could be simple, which means you come to a space, if that's breathing deeply, if that's closing the eyes and going inward, or if you're with a partner, another way is to look at them in the eyes. So what we're trying to do is hold presence, just be completely present, instead of letting the emotions overtake us. So that might start, it's almost like the yoga practice. So if you're in a yoga pose and you're uncomfortable, in the beginning when you start practicing, you just want to get out of it and you might freak out. But over time, you can hold space for that uncomfortability. You can breathe into it. You can stay in a place of, in the analogy of maybe conflict in yourself, without being overwhelmed by it, without running away from it. So it's sort of the same thing with relationship. How can you bring that space when you're into a conflict with another, a partner? And, one way would be to start to practice naming what's happening. So that builds consciousness. So slowing down, maybe by closing the eyes, breathing deeply, maybe walking away, changing your physiology, right? Meaning if you need to walk to process or open yourself to the other person. If you ever notice fights, often when you're fighting, you start looking away. And in fact, my wife will say it to me. She's like, look at me. Because if I look at her, I'm not going to be so crazy. She knows that. I'm going to slow down. So key things, changing your physiology, opening up to that person, slowing down your breathing, and then giving yourself the capability, just like, so those things could be akin to that yoga analogy, to then start to say, okay, what is it what is the emotion? And what is it making me feel? Because the feeling is what comes first, usually. Usually there's a trigger inside that we feel in our bodies, in our nervous system. And that starts to direct us. So we feel that, and then we start to say, okay, I'm feeling it here. And what are the stories that are coming up? Now, that's a lot to happen, right, in the middle of a conflict. But think of the quarterback analogy. I'm sorry for those people who are not sports fans. I'm not a sports fan, but this is just a nice analogy. So if you think about the quarterback analogy, the quarterback has to do all that in a moment of, I don't know, what is it, a minute? I don't know what the countdown is for football. But there's a certain amount of time they have to think, okay, I'm here. I'm feeling this person coming at me. So they're holding space for their feelings because their feelings are information. If they didn't hold space for the feelings, they get tackled, right? And then they start to say, okay, I can see this person. I can see that person. So the idea is, how can we slow down so we have space for all of that? I can feel my emotions. I can name it. I can, well, first off, hold space for that process of feeling the emotion. I can name it, I can understand where it's at, and I can start to see what it's telling me. I think it was Daniel Goleman. He had that book out years ago. I think it's Emotional Intelligence. And it's a little older, but I still think it's like it's a worthy read. And what I love about Daniel Goleman, because you might be thinking, I don't care about my emotions. I'm not an emotional person. I'm not emotional. But what he says and reiterates a lot is that we do everything based on emotions. We do everything. Like, I have a job, or you have a job, because of an emotion that could be connected to scarcity, to fear, to the need for joy. That's a feeling, right? We get into relationships for feelings. And sometimes, because of our initial relationship and some of the cycles that might have happened, we might play out those cycles to get that same feeling. That's why it's important. Does that make sense?
It makes sense to me because I've had to go through that hard lesson several times, But let me make sure I understand for the audience. So if we, first of all, none of us can pretend that we aren't making decisions based on feelings. That's just how our nervous system works and the human experience. Secondly, if we don't use the feelings as information, we will repeat patterns like from our primary relationships when we're young. We will seek out feelings that we have thought were normal or safe, or that's like what we're used to. So we'll seek that out in our adult partnerships, even if it's unhealthy. Is that what you're saying?
Exactly. So in one sense, there might be feelings that you're aware of. Yeah, like I do want the joy of this or that. But then there are these other feelings that we might be more unconscious of that, again, we're replicating because we felt them, not for any bad reason, but they were felt at a young age, probably to survive. There was some survival tactic.
For instance, in fighting, like our parents, if they were fighting, we may have gotten scared by that, right? We may not have seen them repair well. We may have just seen bad fighting. And so then when we fight in our partnership, we may have the tendency to collapse or even fight back without any space for the other person's side, or sort of this posturing thing of where like nothing can get in. But really we're trying to avoid feeling the feeling of the scared animal inside of us that we had as a child watching our parents fight.
Yeah, and the scared animal thing is so important to bring up because if you look at cutting edge people in the field of relationship and the nervous system, like Dan Siegel is one of them, you start to see that you might wonder, like, why can't I control this? That's what I wonder. Why? Like, literally, why am I so... It's not just because I'm an Italian American and I'm fiery. Why? And it's because the nervous system becomes animalistic and it goes into the back of the brain, which is that fight or flight, right? It can get so easily brought there. So that's where it's the practice of allowing ourselves to not be hijacked by that space, but to bring it to the front of the brain that allows us to slow down, to make more nuanced decisions. But I'm so glad that you brought that up because that's literally what happens. So we have to remember that we are being brought to an animal state. And it's my belief that we're not animals. I mean, we are animals. But we have the capability as human beings to raise our consciousness and make decisions not based on that place inside of us. It is part of us, but it does not have to be us. And then one more thing I want to pick up on that you said, you mentioned the term repair. And that's something, again, that I would recommend as a tool or something to start working on is, okay, conflict's one thing. you know, if you're on this journey, if you're working with a coach or you're reading some books about relationships, you're trying to work through conflict, it's still hard. It's hard for me. But if you can work on repair, which means how can you not allow that conflict to stay present in the nervous system, in the interaction dynamic of your relationship for the next day, for the next week, for the next lifetime. And I got to give my wife a lot of credit because in our relationship, she's really good. And I think it's because of her upbringing. I think she's been taught it. I don't know if she's learned it recently. I think it's just part of her self over the years. She's really good at repair. She doesn't hold on to things. She lets them go. She wakes up. And I really have to appreciate that in her. Which leads me to one more quick thing, is that the beautiful thing about you might be thinking, oh, this is a lot of work. This is kind of like I'm in the trenches here with all this relationship work. But the beautiful thing is that when you're in partnership, what I just said starts to happen is you start to learn from your partner becomes your ability to heal. Because they both show you your stories and your triggers. And then there are things in them that you need for yourself. Right? That they can teach you. You know how like they say, we like opposites attract. I think it's also that opposites attract, but whatever that person has, it's something that we're being asked to own in our own self, in our own way, not just them having it. Does that make sense? Oh, yeah. So that's the beauty of partner relationship too. It sounds like it's kind of like, well, this is intense, but you also you go deep in yourself and you learn so much about yourself through this other person. I can't imagine being by myself single. I mean, it might be a lot easier, but I would not learn nearly as much about myself.
I heard a thing, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. And so, I mean, you just shared so many really great points. And one of the things is like the benefit of doing all this work is this earned secure partnership in which you can make amazing projects like having a yoga studio and a boutique health and wellness shop. It's not easy to collaborate on that stuff with anyone, but to speak with someone who you share the rest of your life with. But if you guys are showing that by putting in the work and by learning these tools, and that is the yoga of relationship, you can then create these really beautiful offerings and create more impact. And that's again why relationships are so important for society, because when couples are really strong and they're really co-evolving each other, then the impact that we can have on the world is so much greater than what we could just do alone. And so I love everything you were saying there. I love the point about how we it's not just love yourself first. It's like part of the way we learn to love ourselves is in relationship. So I mean, there's a lot of really great names dropped in that chunk of conversation we just had. Dan Siegel, Harville Hendricks. You mentioned the Emotional Intelligence book.
Yeah, Emotional Intelligence by Daniel Goleman.
Like I highly recommend checking all these people out because the more that we can become aware of what's going on inside of us and our patterns and our reactions, the more that we can at least start to bring awareness to that, right? And with awareness comes the possibility for choice. And so that's really powerful. And thank you so much for sharing that with the audience. I know that'll really help them. And maybe you could talk a little bit about how you do work with couples. Like, do you do online? Do you only do in person? How does it work if someone's like, okay, I know I need to learn some more skills. How could they work with you?
Yeah. I do in person in Tucson. So we're in Tucson, Arizona. And then I also travel back to Philadelphia about once a month. And I do in person in Philadelphia. And then I do online. I mean, as you mentioned, with COVID, so many people were, quarantined and with each other and having some difficulties and going through it. So I did a lot of stuff on Zoom. So we do stuff online. And I work with couples, but I also work with individuals because I've noticed one thing I've noticed actually, which is really interesting, is couples or individuals who are in relationship and then maybe got out of relationship, but are looking to prepare for the next one, which I got to give those people so much credit. Like they're like, okay, I'm going to take some personal responsibility. I want to get ready for what's going to happen next. I want to build those tools off the get-go. So I work with individuals, and then I also work with couples online. And I work in a variety of ways. Sometimes it's just a short program to give them tools, or it's a little bit of an ongoing coaching checkup. But the coaching idea is that you are not just being like listened to. You are being listened to, but you're also going to be held accountable, and you're going to be given tools that you're going to use in your life and then check in about them. So that's the one thing that I find really helpful. It's like the yoga analogy. Sometimes people like to go to yoga class or a gym class because they feel like, okay, I'm going to be held accountable for this. And it's we know in society that lives are complicated, and sometimes we don't have that insight to do it on our own. So the coach can help you. Okay, how has that been helping you, giving you perspective, holding space, and especially letting you explore. I say this to my clients a lot. I feel like it's a retreat. You know, I know it sounds weird. It's like I'm having issues with my partner, and this isn't a retreat. This is like putting out the fire. Like yeah, exactly. Not that retreat. Not like it's a retreat. You know, in the sense of like you're giving yourselves or yourself, if it's individual coaching or couples coaching, to just slow down, like we said before, and be with yourself and your feelings and your inner child and each other. And there's so much beauty in that. I mean, it almost makes me want to cry. I really believe the coaching experience, having gotten coaching, and we talked about this, Kelly and I, before this official talk, and giving it is just, it's so beautiful. And we're I think in some ways, a beautiful time in the world, because there's a lot of that out there that we can avail ourselves of.
And people are recognizing the need for it. I think being literally, yes, locked inside our house, but locked inside ourselves, right? Needing to retreat inside. And, you know, if someone has been to therapy, they may be wondering, like, is it therapy? Is coaching therapy, or how is it different?
Yeah, it is different. Well, first of all, there's not the same schooling that you would go through for therapy. So it is different type of schooling. But talk therapy, it has a different nature to it, right? There obviously will be tools and techniques, but coaching is much more forward-driven, and it's not necessarily, sometimes, but it's not necessarily meant to be ongoing forever, right? You might have a coach for a certain amount of time to learn these techniques and start to do them. So it's a lot more forward and tool-oriented, that you're getting these tools, you're being held accountable for them, in addition to some therapeutic techniques, which would be listening, reflective listening, holding space for emotions. So I find it to be a cool combination. And if you're like trying to figure out which is which, I think the best, or which is good for you rather, I would recommend trying people out. You know, I think the key thing, my wife and I were just talking about this because we're getting coaching. So we're getting coaching, we get it ongoingly, is to have that resonance with the person. So, and to make sure that your goals are going to be met, right? So when you have an intro call, usually with people, that's complimentary, and then see what the resonance is, if you feel like this is someone you can vibe with, and then ask them about their process. And that will give you more of a gauge, because some coaches have some therapeutic vibes and vice versa. Right, so there is in between.
Some coaches are actually therapists and have the whole licensing.
Totally,
stuff.
Exactly. And like, so for me, speaking of that, this is what's cool about the realm of coaching, is that it is very dynamic. I also bring in my yoga wisdom background, so which I think is really wonderful. So I bring in yoga wisdom and also bring in Ayurveda, because I studied Ayurveda. So those are other tools that can also be applied to relationships, I think, in a beautiful way, which I'm not going to get into right now because we only have a little bit of time.
That's our second interview, talking about how the food affects us and our Agni and stuff. But that is really amazing. That is really amazing wisdom and info there. And I love how you bring in yoga and stuff. So for those listening who are interested in maybe booking a session with you to try out coaching, what's the best way to do that?
You can reach out to me on Instagram. My Instagram is @empoweredconnection.me, or you can go to our website. You can see all the offerings we have through our brick and mortar space, which is Bhava, Wellness, BHAVA Wellness. Instagram and on our website, babawellness.com, and you can see my coaching offerings there.
That's awesome. And, we're going to talk about the boutique a tiny bit. Just it's hard to open up a brick and mortar store and do all that. Plus, your wife is making medicines, and maybe you could share just a little bit about that journey of like what is it like to run a business with your partner, and any wisdom or tips you could share with everyone else, because I think it's a really intelligent move to think like, okay, well, how can we put both of our energy into a common direction that supports our vision? But then, of course, we run into all sorts of different challenges along the way. So, yeah, wondering if you could speak into that a little bit.
Yeah, for sure. First, I have to say that my wife is definitely the more talented one. Somehow Kaylee found me, but my wife is much more talented, and she is a really, really wonderful herbalist, and she has a whole beautiful product line of all natural healing, internal medicine, and external medicine. But, it's funny because we were joking last night how much every now and again we fantasize that we didn't work together. But having said that, I think working together as like kind of a recap of all the stuff we're talking about has been such a powerful container within which to learn how to regulate in relationship. So we're learning so many tools through that, especially creating boundaries is another one that is a beautiful subject matter to talk about. But, as I see it, and I feel super blessed. I mean, we work really hard, but I do feel like we are very lucky and very blessed to do what we do. I feel as though what's so wonderful about working with your partner is that, and working for yourself, is that your life and your lifestyle and what you believe in become kind of intertwined with what you do. And we see so many people who work and come home, and it's very compartmentalized type of life. So first off, it really integrates all parts of yourself and all parts of what you believe in. And then I think what it also does is it empowers each other. I think generally, if you're working together or not, when you are seeing each other in a way of collaboration, you're seeing your partner, so much empowerment comes from that. And you learn that your relationship is not about competition. And that's one thing that I think has been a really wonderful process for us, is that we are here to assist one another, to empower one another, and to hold space for one another and help one another, instead of, we're here to compete with one another. Now that, of course, comes up every now and again. I mean, we're only human beings, but that collaboration, even if you're not working together, so to make this a larger analogy for everyone out there, if you're just in a partnership and you have different jobs and you come home, to think about your relationship as a collaboration. Because oftentimes we think about what we want. Just like if I was working with my wife and I'm just thinking about, I just want to do what I want to do. Same thing when we go home. Sometimes we think about, what pleases me? But if you think about it as always collaboration, a lot of thinkers that I'm sure people, teachers that we know in common will say, the we comes first. Okay, the we comes first. Now, at the same time, that means we have to hold a lot of space for ourselves as individuals. So it's not as though it's codependency, because the individual strength allows the we to become stronger. But the idea is that in relationship, we're always thinking, okay, how are we mutually interdependent?
Jason Gaddis says, I have your back and my back, and you have your back and your back.
Yeah, beautiful. Yeah, Jason Gaddis, we both love him.
Love you, Jason. I'm going to send this to you.
You're the best. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. And that's if you think about it, that's a hard space to navigate. But how beautiful is that? And again, in the larger sense, these relational ideas, think about how they would apply to our relationship to the earth. I got your back, you got my back. Instead of I'm going to take from you. I mean, the relationship idea is, you mentioned this earlier, is just like these tools, you mentioned it as like how in relationship or partnership, how they can affect a larger society. When we start to see things in that light, I think massive change can happen, And so I appreciate that you brought that up, Prabhu.
Yeah, and I mean, we both share Bhakti Yoga as like a primary spiritual practice, and in that you have the divine couple. You have Radharani and Krishna.
Yeah.
You also, if you look at Taoism, you have yin-yang symbol, right?
Yeah.
The dance of the feminine and the masculine, of that balance. And I think that it is inherent in the makeup of reality to figure out this dance somehow, right? And so it's so inspiring to hear stories like yours and to share that, because I think it really gives people positive role models to, take what works and fits, try it on, and try and improve their relational experience. And you mentioned also working for yourself, which is extraordinary. There's so many people, especially my audience, I know, that are either making that transition out of a 9-to-5 or a corporate job, or they want to, or they have, and they're in that first year. But like, how did you? What was your transition? How did you go from like not working for yourself to working for yourself? Have you always done that, or like when did that happen?
Yeah, it's interesting you bring this up, because I do also coach people a little bit on this, because I've been running a business, multiple businesses for years, so it's just sort of a natural thing that I would mentor people about, doing their own thing, opening their own business. It's in my blood. My dad owns his own business. He's an accountant, which I could never be, because I would fail miserably at accounting. I already am. Owning my business, I'm failing at accounting. But I'm getting better.
I pay someone else to manage the books.
Yeah, smart. But it's in my blood, but I didn't do it right away. I really love that this question came right after the Bhakti Yoga idea, because what happened is I was teaching yoga as an independent contractor and doing massage as an independent contractor, and because I also do body work, came from a body work background. And when I got deep into spiritual life, I felt propelled, to be frank. It wasn't even planned. I felt that I was supposed to do something that was bigger than me. And I don't think I was qualified at that time. I'm still not very qualified. That's a Bhakti Yoga thing, by the way. We're always saying that we're not good enough. But I do think back then I wasn't qualified. But I felt through some of these experiences I mentioned in the beginning of the podcast, I felt like there was something bigger that this container of my relationship with my wife, my skill set, was supposed to usher forth. So for me, it was a spiritual experience. It was like, it's time for you to step into some space. And when I did it, initially, it was really of the mindset of, I'm here to offer something. I don't know what it's supposed to happen. I don't know if I'm supposed to succeed. I don't know what it's supposed to come to. I don't know, but I feel called. Now, if you're not necessarily from my spiritual background or not a spiritual person, to make this generally applicable, what I'm saying right now is that I really believe, listen to the inner voice. I know it's going to sound a little cheesy, but listen and be present. And if that's the divine, if that's just your own self, your deepest self, listen to your heart and fucking follow it. Because that's what we're here to do. The world needs what you have to offer. It's not even about you. That's the thing. I think there's a lot of you, which is true, but more so what you have, others need. So it's about other people. It's not even about you in a sense. Does that make sense? It's
like if God gave you this treasure box full of gems and he said, hey, I have 50 to 100 people I need you to go give these to when you incarnate this life. And then we just kept that. Yeah, I love it. Beautiful. Yeah, beautiful. And so for many of us, and this is where coaching, all the things that we try to do with our space, yoga, asana, other types of healing work, it helps us see that we have the treasure box. It helps us okay, what is this thing in my room?
okay, there's something. Let me take the shirt off of it. Let me dust it off. I got to get a key. Okay, I'll find a key. Oh, I found a key. So this is what this process does, these healing processes, and then they help us see our treasure. And to slow down, like I said earlier with conflict, and to give yourself that retreat, not the retreat of running away, but the retreat of being present with yourself, will allow us to see that treasure box. And when I see it, I mean, we want to see it, like, in its seriousness. Like, this is something, to your point, brother, like, we've been given this by the divine. Like, this is serious. We got to give it out. Otherwise, we're being misers, you know.
I am so in alignment with everything you're saying. One of our mottos here at the Podcast Farm is Amplify What You Love. And I think that people getting into touch with what genuinely lights them up and motivates them, you know, that you can't do what you've done here without having that fire inside. You can't put in that much work unless you genuinely love it, which is why people are so unsatisfied working for someone else, because it's not their vision. Not everyone. I know that there's some really amazing organizations. Like, there needs to be employees. There needs to be people working for other companies. And if you find alignment in that is totally bona fide and awesome. For those who are unsatisfied, it's because there is an inner voice saying there's something more. And it's scary as hell to answer that call, because it often requires some sort of leap of faith, right? You're giving up financial security, you're giving up comfort, you're giving up being unnoticed and unseen, and you have to be seen and share, and it can be really vulnerable, but it's like, that's what we're here for. So it's not worth living without doing that, in my opinion.
Especially if you're saying, yeah, I love that you said it's not for everyone. I think that's true. We all have different moods. But for those who feel unsatisfied, I think that's great. It's almost like we were talking about earlier with relationship, that emotional intelligence. Again, playing in here. If you're feeling, I'm unsatisfied, like I don't, what am I doing? Like, I won't go into the feelings that you might feel. Then be with that. Give yourself some space. Explore. Be in that, but also explore what doesn't do that. What brings you joy? What are your natural gifts, that treasure chest? And I couldn't agree more. I think if that's what you're going through, that's what you're here to do. I mean, COVID has shown us, this is the silver lining. I'm not saying that I would want some pandemic to happen. It's been so much suffering. And it's been a very difficult time for so many of us. But we start to see, we get a glimpse at the material world in our lives. There is no real security, in a sense. There really isn't. I mean, you just look at history and you see there's pandemics, there's wars. We've been sort of cut off from that in the West for so many years. So for me, and I said this in class the other day, it makes me more committed because I don't know. I don't know. It's not going to make me double down and try to like hold on to everything and be as secure as possible. Instead, it makes me say, okay, I don't know, so let's open up, because our lives are like, a drop of water rolling off a lotus petal. I mean, we don't know that, but when we really take a look at it, my dad would always say this thing. He has all these cheesy sayings, but this one echoes in my mind. Yeah, son, you go to sleep when you're 15 and you wake up and you're 30. You go to sleep when you're 30 and you wake up and you're 45. You go to sleep at 45, you wake up, and then soon you might not wake up. But it does, so now is the time.
What would you do if you knew that in a year you wouldn't wake up, right? And it's like living life with that mindset. If we think about our death, if we don't ignore it, it lights a fire under our ass, because, like you said beautifully, we do not know. We are a drop of water on a lotus petal. Control is an illusion. Yeah. It's a total illusion. Like, we think that we can control things. We think that we have, complete control over, if I'm driving, I'll be safe. If I have enough money, I'll be safe, all this stuff. But the truth of the matter is, surrender is really the only option. We can fight surrender and suffer, or we can try and learn to surrender and relax into the bliss of existence, which comes with a ton of suffering. And actually, I came here to get tattooed from Jesse Bob at Sita Ram, And it was an amazing meditation in suffering and surrendering, because it was a 4-hour tattoo. And there's so much space to open up in surrendering. And there must be something that, obviously with your yoga background, that you are constantly exploring with asana, with yoga asana, how to breathe into spaces in the body, how to create more spaciousness even when you're straining yourself or in a complicated pose. And so I could see how that all kind of feeds back on what you're doing.
Yeah, and it's great that you brought up the idea, like if we were to know we were going to die, I have this little tattoo of a sickle on my hand here, and that's my little memento mori. So I look at it and remember that I will in fact perish. And in Bhakti Yoga, this yoga of devotion that Kayla and I are alluding to, the main text starts with that. It starts with someone who's a king, who's on their deathbed, and what is life really about? So if you're looking to work for yourself and become an entrepreneur in the realm of the deep spiritual wisdom of Bhakti Yoga, it's also, the alignment is also, I'm going to die. I got gifts that were given to me. How can I offer them back? That's what we're here to do. I'm going to die. I got gifts. So we want to learn what those gifts are. And then they were given, and I want to offer them back, right? And if you don't offer them back, the divine, the universe is going to be kind of like, hey, right? Just like a relationship. Go back to the relationship idea. That creates a relationship with the higher power, the love supreme. When we see our gifts and we offer them back and they're appreciated, it's a personal thing. It's a relationship.
It all comes back to a relationship. And so, dear listeners, thank you so much for tuning in. As you know, I am traveling right now, so this has been a mobile broadcast of Be On Air. I have literally been on air, flying here to Arizona, and I'm so grateful to you, Damodar, for making time to have this conversation. And I want to request that if you're listening to this and you're feeling what we're talking about, shoot me a DM over at the podcast farm on Instagram and share with me what you got from this. Share with me what your gems are. Share with me if anything clicked for you or moved for you. I would love to hear. It is always great to hear from you all and hear how this stuff is landing for you. And Damodar, thank you again. You and your wonderful teammate Radha. You have Bhava Wellness. You have the yoga studio here. We're going to put links in the show notes. You can connect with Damodar and his coaching through his Instagram, which I'll also put in the show notes. One more time, what is the Instagram?
It's at empoweredconnection.me.
And yeah, we'll be, I'm sure we'll have more conversations in the future, but it's been absolutely wonderful getting to connect with you and tune in.
Yeah, Kelly, thank you so much. I'm just so lit up talking to you. I can't wait to talk more. We're going to do a lot more talking when the podcast ends, I hope, and maybe another podcast one day. But thanks for rolling into the desert town and hanging out with Jesse, getting tattooed, and coming by Bhava Wellness. Super appreciative.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Bol.
Great to be here with you. All right, everyone. Thanks so much for tuning in to another episode of Be On Air. This has been a mobile session. And again, if you've enjoyed this, please follow us over at the Instagram. You can find us at the Podcast Farm. We post a lot of content over there, and it'd be great to have you as part of that community. And what means the most to us is if you can share this podcast with anyone that you think will benefit from it. It really makes a huge difference getting our message out and connecting with new friends. And yeah, it's as simple as sharing. If you listen on Spotify, if you listen on Apple, just share the link, copy it over, share it on your story, send it to one friend. Anything really helps a whole bunch. So thank you again for tuning in, and I'll catch you on the next episode.